No,
Hi,
I
welcome
sound like
to
some
the
zombie.
Real Drunk Show. I am
Woo!
Kia, and I am here today with one of my favorite people, someone who I have talked to in quarantine more than like ever. Laura. How are you today, Laura?
I am good. I have every light in my apartment, in this room, shining in front of me. So, yeah.
You are the star.
Woo!
Laura is joining me today to talk about how evangelical Christians help shape this political moment we're in. Before we dive into the conversation, Laura, tell us who you are. Where are you? What you doing? What you drinking?
Well, okay, so my name is Laura Polk. On Twitter, I'm at CLolaGo. And I am in Richmond, Virginia. I am let's see, I'm not between jobs per se. I am underemployed, but I do quite a few things. I do research, I teach cultural studies and English language learners,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, occasionally tutor folks. Um, I grew up in Virginia, actually, an hour away from here.
Oh, so you are kind
So
of back home.
yeah, I'm back home. Yeah, it's strange because I left Virginia after I finished like a year after college and didn't live here most of my adult life. Um, so now I'm 41, which I can't believe. Um, but so yeah, I'm back here. It's been really interesting to be here in this moment,
Mhm.
especially in Richmond, the former Confederate capital of
Mm.
former capital of the Confederacy. And I'll bring that up a little bit later too, because that has its own. It's kind of interesting. What am I drinking? I am drinking the finest Moscato that $10 can buy.
Wait,
So
the finest Moscato.
yes,
$10.
I
You splurge because, baby.
I was having a discussion about Moscato yesterday. So
Uh-huh.
like it's like a step above a wine cooler.
Mm-hmm.
Because a wine cooler, I'm like, why are you bothering? That's just juice. But like Moscato is because I realized most wines I don't like cheap wine except Moscato. Other wines I've liked have been more than I can afford. So I'm like, well, if I'm broke, then I'm just gonna buy Moscato.
And see, I am all bottom shelf of whatever's on the bottom shelf at Publix. Like, I am not looking higher than the bottom two shelves, and I'm gonna grab whatever looks great that day.
That makes sense.
So,
Um,
to start off, I was about to call you Lola, Laura.
Either one. Lola was my nickname for a really long time. In just various circles, and so yeah, I kind of went by a pseudonym for a while
Mm-hmm.
online, but my government name isn't in my Twitter profile, but I use it everywhere else.
Okay.
My government name is here, so.
So, to start off, what does evangelical Christianity mean?
Oh,
Like, who are these people?
who are these people? Um, so actually, let me. I'm gonna out of order from what I originally planned. I think I want to talk about my background first, real quick,
Okay.
just to give context. So I grew up in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, and I grew up around different church traditions. But the one I spent probably the most sustained amount of time around was white evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time around the Mennonites. I've been in Black charismatic churches. Um, so yeah, so I'm familiar with kind of the traditions of all these different ones. I went to a Christian school,
Okay.
sixth through ninth grade, for kindergarten, sixth through ninth grade, 12th grade, and in college.
Mm.
Um, the Christian school I went to was Southern Baptist. If you know anything about Southern Baptists, um, Wait, did Kia go away?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Your picture just went away. I was like, wait, am I talking to myself? So yeah. So anyway, if you know anything about Southern Baptists, yeah, and I'll get into that a little bit later because I'm going to be talking about some of the stuff from just growing up. I also, my parents were missionaries in West Africa. That's a whole other interview.
We'll have to circle back for that one.
So I've been around every kind of white Christian, almost every kind I've been around, but particularly in like different settings. So like white evangelicals here in the U.S. versus white evangelical missionaries overseas. And if you follow me on Twitter, I've talked a bit about that. But yeah, so I also worked for the church as an adult a lot. I worked for the denomination of a mainline Protestant church. I did service learning programs. One that was actually two that were related to the church.
Okay.
Not like I wasn't going around passing out tracts. Like it was like we're doing community development. Like I was volunteering as an ESL teacher and stuff. ESL tutor, so, and then let's see the other church thing. Missionaries. Yeah, I mean every church thing. At some point, I went to vacation Bible school. I've been to church. I've been to church Christian cheerleading camp. Also,
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Oh yes. Oh well, Christian schools and cheerleading. Also, I mean, listen, we could do a whole show on the last few things I just named. But yeah, I taught Sunday school. I was on a mission board. I recruited for service learning, for religious service learning. I've been on mission trips. Some of y'all may have heard me rant about that. I have led mission trips. Am I missing anything? Yeah. So even though I haven't actually gone to church, as in the building, for a while, but it's always kind of been a part of my life. And I identify as a Christian, but but I'm not like I'm in love with Jesus like those folks. That's just, I just need them to calm down. But
needs to calm down too.
But I did grow up very conservative, and I've definitely kind of moved away from that theology. But I've still, at some point, I kept a foot in that world to a certain extent. So yeah. So, and the thing about being interested in religion, I had lots of friends who weren't religious before. When I went to grad school, I started grad school for anthropology 12 years ago. And I originally, because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study. Religion, but American Christianity was minor. It was kind of a secondary thing. But I found that I was one of two practicing religious people in my cohort, and people kept asking me questions. Like Jesus Camp came out while I was in grad school. If you remember that documentary.
Yes. Yeah.
So like some folks were like, "What?" Like they was like, "What?"
So
explain.
Would Jesus Camp be an accurate portrayal of evangelical Christians? Like, how do we know evangelical Christians when we see them in the world? And is that the norm for Christianity?
Oh, I mean, I would say that's on the fringe side, because like there's so many nuances, with like even like within the Black church, there's nuances in that. But like with evangelicals, there's different kinds. Like there's like sort of the mainstream folks. Like you have your like Rick Warren and
yes, purpose-driven life.
Purpose-driven life. And who's the other? I'm blanking on the other. Shane Claiborne. I don't know if they would put them in the same. But like you have like the folks that are kind of mainstream or sort of moderate, and then like there's folks to the right, and then but that's even that it's a continuum. So like for me, and one of the things I realized is like I could look at something, and by the language I could tell somewhat what strain it was. So like like not this precise one, but I could kind of see, like if I hear someone say we're a Bible believing church, that is not an open and affirming church. First of all, LGBTQ people probably could not attend, could not attend, and I probably wouldn't be welcome either with my feminazi views. And like there's like continuums.
So there are code words that people can look out for to be able to recognize, like Bible believing. The salvation language comes out a lot of that. And like you must be saved. I was saved. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like the Jesus camp, that was definitely more of a fringe, and in part because they had them speaking in tongues. And that's not because I remember them doing it in the Black church. Actually, when I went to in children's church, I remember them having us speak in tongues, and I didn't understand because I was 9. But yeah, like, and what they were saying about like Harry Potter was evil.
Yes.
Like I know I'm familiar with some of those beliefs, but yeah, I would not say they would be, and I don't think a lot of evangelicals. I think there are a lot of evangelicals will be like, we don't know her.
Okay.
With them. But yeah, they're affiliated with Ted Haggard, that church too. And if anyone remembers Ted Haggard, well, Google him. There's a lot. But so yeah, but after that, like I found myself kind of explaining stuff to my classmates. Like someone came across was a revival, not a revival. Oh gosh, I can't remember, but it's like one of those like rallies. I call it Goosebump Christianity, where they play like praise and worship music, and everyone's crying a lot, and they're all like, we need to be on fire for Jesus. And so someone was asking me, because they were talking about the sword, the fruits of the, like the sword of the spirit, and the
spirit, the sword of the word. Don't get me to tearing up stuff. But yeah.
So I remember my friend was like, are they going to have weapons? I was like, oh no, that's a metaphor. Because she was like, look at me legit, like, should we be concerned? Because they were coming to the DC area, and I was like, no, this is from the Bible. But like, I realized, like these are things I heard most of my life that were normal. And so when I hear sword of the spirit or whatever it is, I know they're not actually going to brandish a sword. I know they mean the Bible. Now there is something in the metaphor that they liken the Bible to a weapon, but yeah, so that's kind of where I realized I had a lot of knowledge, and I was really interested in this topic. And that's kind of what led me to, do this research and talk about it, rant about it online a lot.
Okay, so tell me this. We are connecting your knowledge to this current political moment. How would you describe this current political moment? Like, what are 3 things that stand out to you about this moment?
3 things. Some combination of trash fire, hell, trash fire, garbage. I don't know. Everything is terrible. But also, I know those weren't 3 words. History is repeating itself.
Okay, so hellfire, everything is terrible, and history is repeating itself. What's interesting to me is like 2002 has been a year. It's funny because churches, Black churches are really good at this. Like they all start off the new year with a phrase, when whatever rhymes with the year is like the prophecy of the year. And 2020 was like the year of perfect vision or clear vision. And when I tell you 2020 came, and it seems like it ripped America open at the seams. And we have been able to see every way that America has like kind of just how it's fallen apart, how it doesn't work. And when we trace this back through history, it all leads back to this little club, evangelical Christians who found their home in right-wing politics. So how did you get started in this research? So, because you had this knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, what was the seminal point or the turning point, the point that made you say, okay, let me dig into this deeper? Where did you?
Because I had been a part of an interdisciplinary project after grad school that looked at different religions, and I was assigned to evangelicals. Because everyone was assigned to a different aspect, like Protestants, Catholics, blah, blah, blah. But it really, there were two documentaries that piqued my interest. There was one called God in America on PBS. I highly recommend it. It's very good. It's like six episodes.
I watched a couple of those for school.
Which one did you watch?
I cannot remember right now. Don't get me to lying to you.
Were there reenactments or was there actual footage?
I don't know, because you know what? And I feel like I watched it recently in my religion class, like Religions of North America. So it was probably because it explores the different segments. So yeah, I'm not sure which one because we watched a lot of different videos, but yeah.
Yeah, like that. Because I say that because like they go basically to from colonial times up to like it came out in like 2006. So up to Bush Jr. But the one that was talking about the 60s and 70s, there was a comment that stood out. They were interviewing the son of Francis Schaeffer, who was this theologian who was very instrumental in crafting a lot of the rhetoric around like being against abortion. We were talking to his son, Frank Schaeffer, who's actually written a book about a lot of this. But I think it was Frank Schaeffer said it. Might need to go back and see who said. But there's all these different comments, and then they said when Roe versus Wade was decided, there was very little anything. Because like growing up, Roe versus Wade was like the worst day. I was heard like it was the worst day ever, and there was crying and gnashing of teeth or whatever.
Yeah.
But he said, "Oh no, there wasn't really like it was mainly seen as a Catholic issue, but Protestants, like other Christians, were kind of because, and also it was still kind of unseemly for white Christians to be involved in politics because our folks weren't really given a choice."
Yes.
So, but yeah, and he said, "Oh, actually," and he said distinctly, Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell. And that's when I perked up. He said neither of them cared. And I was like, wait, what? What? Because again, I'm from Virginia. I grew up watching 700 Club. Pat Robertson. Yeah. I did not go to Liberty, thank God. I went to a more progressive Christian school. But I knew quite a bit about Liberty. I knew about Jerry Falwell, and I know their brand. I was like, what? It's like, yeah, Pat Robertson wasn't really interested in getting involved. Jerry Falwell was like, well, that's a Catholic issue. I'm interested in converting people.
That is so interesting because my Christian ethics project was on the ethics of something. Basically, I've explored the ethics of abortion, or I cannot even think about what it was, but I talked about Christian ethics and abortion. Can't remember the name of the project that I just did that explains how 2020 has been. But I found the same thing, like large evangelical magazines who either did not care or supported abortion. Like
the Southern Baptists. Well, they did. Yeah, like the Southern Baptists. They weren't against it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's very interesting because I always, like you, grew up in the midst of these 90s culture wars, and
Right.
all I heard was like Christians are for, because a lot of times when the media talks about Christianity, they're talking about evangelical Christians. And
Yes.
and all the rest of us gets looped into with them. So yeah, that's interesting. So I
Yeah.
know for me that was mind blowing. So I can imagine that like it's like having your whole worldview slip
Yeah.
shaken from under you. So if they were okay with it or not caring about it now, how did that become like the foundation of everything they believe? Or even an even more important question is like, how did they even get involved in right-wing politics to begin with?
And so, I will give one little anecdote. The Southern Baptists, all the main denominations have their what do they call them, general assemblies, or whatever they decide church polity. If you look at the Southern Baptist General Assembly policies or whatever, they were basically like, we're not really fans of abortion, but if you gotta, that was basically how they were.
Yeah.
You just don't go wild, and then, but then later in the 70s, then that started to shift. That's also when the Republican Party started to shift to being anti-abortion too. So yeah, so that's really important. Another thing that blew my mind, I was like, I'm sorry, what? The Southern Baptists, what? But to answer that, there's so many different ways to start. And I want to be clear, like, this didn't start in the 70s. There was stuff that was laying the foundation before then. And at the end, like, I'm gonna try to make a thread, like a list of readings that I think will be really helpful. But it started with Paul Weyrich. If anyone knows, if anyone thinks I'm mispronouncing, please let me know. I've been reading this stuff for a year, and I'm like, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. But Paul Weyrich, he is basically the architect. He was the one who was instrumental, like crafting the sort of the like bringing together sort of the pro-life stance, or like centering abortion as what they were rallying around. And he was the one that was kind of reaching across the board to not just evangelicals, but like Catholics, to Jewish people, and some Mormons sprinkled in, and kind of bringing them together with a common goal. He had accomplices, but yeah, he was the person that basically was the architect. He was himself Catholic, and he was very politically savvy, but from what I read about him, he was also, I think, somewhat sincere about this.
Oh, really?
To a certain extent, because he was religious. Like he grew up religious. He grew up Catholic. I think one of his parents was Protestant, but yeah. So there was some sincerity, but there was basically all these things that came together. So first off, there's Barry Goldwater, who was a conservative presidential candidate and who lost. Apparently a lot of white people were sad about that, including Phyllis Schlafly. She caped hard for him, and there's a book that was actually mentioned in the series, if anyone's seen the miniseries.
Mrs. America.
Mrs. America. Yes, watch that. If you haven't yet, Kate Blanchett is amazing and can do everything, and she better get all those Emmys for that.
Yes.
But yeah, that was watching her, and that was really good. But so Barry Goldwater was one of those, like one of the first catalysts. Like, so his defeat, that disappointed a lot of people. Nixon's resignation was kind of another catalyst, and then white dudes were sad about that. And Paul Weyrich, he came to DC in the 60s and kind of worked his way through. He was a staffer for different Congress people, and the way he tells it, he saw he was basically imitating the liberal activists. I don't know what he meant. I'm still, every time I read these accounts, like, I don't know what he meant by liberal activists. Like, but he was saying he saw like folks on the other side and how organized they were, and how they were on message. And that inspired him. Is like, we need to get like them.
Interesting.
Yeah. And like, they were basically, I don't know if rebellion's the right word, but it was like, they're called actually the New Right. Was the term for them. And it was like the young whippersnappers who were shaking up the party, because the oldest, the sort of the establishment Republicans were, they were just kind of chill. They're like, conservative, but like, yeah, let's calm down. But Paul Weyrich was like, no, we need to, like, he's just like, we need to flip tables. And that's kind of how he got inspired to start this movement. And he had accomplices, Richard Viguerie, another word like I'm having a hard time pronouncing. At some point, someone will have to correct me, who was involved in the direct mailing. Actually key. And like, so in the years after that, like direct mail, like the political things you get, like my opponent hates puppets, like, and the other, and vote for me. So he was instrumental in that. And some of their funding came from Coors, the beer people. Joseph Coors was very heavily involved. Wow. And so they kind of went to work and like putting together this, I guess, this movement. And actually, and Paul Weyrich even says, and that's actually quoted, there's a book that I'll include in the list by Randall Balmer. He's written a few books about the history of evangelicals. But he basically said, like, we were trying out all these things to try to get people rallied, around us. And they're like, well, abortion? And I was like, okay.
So, and that's the story that I hear, like Paul, he kept trying to bring the evangelicals in and they just weren't interested. But then this thing happened at Bob Jones University that brought them all together, and he took advantage of them all being at one, all being on the same accord. So what was going on at Bob Jones University?
So, and I don't want to oversimplify with abortion, because that was kind of what the public campaign. But what pissed them off was what pisses off people and whatever Black folks wanting to breathe air and going about their business.
Wait. So you're telling me racism brought these good Christian folks together, and then they like later said, yeah, let's call it abortion. Let's say
I feel like I'm on the shopping channel. Like, wait, do you say you can cut through metal? So basically, so there's kind of these things happening in parallel. So there's Paul Weyrich, and he's doing his thing. They're in their lairs plotting things. And then with Brown versus Board of Brown versus Board of Education, there's the aftermath from that. Now, on the side of like white evangelicals, the reasons that kind of pushed them to want to organize, the sexual revolution kind of played a part as well, and just general like things like progress that happened in the 60s. School prayer played a part, but the biggest thing is desegregation. And I want to be very clear, because like some of the folks I've mentioned, like they call it what it is, but I've read so much research, and the people researching this topic are overwhelmingly white and male. Having said that, there's material that's really comprehensive and well worth your read. But if I read one more white dude who's like, it was race, but also like, no. It's about, there were other things. Yes, there were other things, but no, racism is what got them up in the morning.
I'm so glad you said that because, like, Randall, I've heard his lectures, a lot of his lectures, because he's put in a lot of work to, like, getting into the Bob Jones story. Because basically what happened, Bob Jones was forced to integrate their schools, but
So I was going to get to, I'm
okay,
sorry.
before I say, but what, the only thing that gives me pause every time Randall says it, who is a white guy, it's like, it wasn't really about race, it was about taxes. And I'm just like, no, sir, like, how can you say that?
Wow, okay, because I've seen one of his lectures. Oh man, I thought he was, oh man, because he was one of my not favorites, but
he's good.
Yeah, he's good. He's done a lot of research.
You know,
I'm tired.
Yeah, but that's like you said, that's where I always fall apart. I was like, how can you say it? Just does not make sense in my mind that you can say it wasn't really about race.
So listen, so we got Paul Warwick doing his thing in DC with his people, and on this side, we have the segregation academies that started forming in response to Ralph Report education. And a lot of them were in the South, but don't get it twisted. There were some in other states as well. But we had all these academies that were forming, and they were. I don't know if that was like the official name for them, but they were formed so that their kids didn't have to go to school with Black kids. And then the IRS got involved because actually no, there was a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court, and it was. Man, see now all these details. I'm not going to name the state because I'll get it wrong. But there is, but I'll put the cases. I have the cases names that I'll put in a link later. But there was two black families that had sued for their children to be accepted into this private school, and then this is basically what set off then the IRS. So then the IRS was like, okay, in the early 70s, like, okay, you need to pay taxes. You need to it seems like you're discriminating in your admissions, and if you're discriminating, then we'll have to revoke your tax exempt status.
So basically, you must pay taxes if you are racially discriminating.
Yeah, and they're like, but we want a racist, and we want to be tax exempt, and they won't the IRS won't let us do both. And I also want to clarify too, because in a lot of accounts they try to say the IRS said this is injustice and went in and told them, and then like all the other stuff happened. But the IRS also kind of it seemed like fell down on their job too.
They like ignored it for years or did not pursue it for years.
Yeah. And basically had to be compelled to like y'all need to do your jobs. So then that was brewing. And there were all these, and this is where all these white dudes, when they say it wasn't about X, it was about Y. This was this is where we always get caught up. And this is, I think evangelicals especially do this really well when it comes to semantics and legalism. So the IRS had these regulations for if you needed to prove that you weren't discriminating in your admissions. And so there were like these, so if you look at it on the surface, like, there are these documents, you have to do this, and this. And if you didn't, then they would revoke your tax exempt status. And then there were some schools that resisted, and the highest profile one was Bob Jones. And like Bob Jones, like they would send out surveys and say, are you racist? And they come back like, no, we're not. And like there was a couple of schools, and Bob Jones was the biggest one, like, no, we're racist. Like all racist all up in here. What? And so that's what led to the fight. And that went on until the 80s, that fight. And so this is happening. Paul Weyrich, I like to say he pops up like a racist Clippy from Microsoft Word. And like, hey, it looks like you're trying to racist and be tax exempt. I can help you with that. And the details in terms of how they really really two-stepped around. It's not about race. It's about the details. Like some of that I think with credit with Paul Weyrich, because it's basically like, look, guys, what if, let's take race out of it and say it's about government intrusion.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government's trying to tell you how to run your school. That's not right. So yeah, I mean, and the thing is, like, if I would imagine if you're an academic, you know, there's analytical reasoning. I don't know, like there's critical thinking where, like, yes, there's what they say, and then there's what they're actually do. Like when James Baldwin said, "I don't believe what you say because I see what you do."
Yes.
And so they're saying, "Oh, it's about the government." Yes, but I always try to bring it back whenever I tweet about it or talk to folks. Yes, the government was telling them to not be racist. Like, y'all just stop. Like, oh, the government's telling us to. Yes, the government was telling you to not be racist. Like, that's the bottom line. There was some red tape, you know, like there was these regulations, there was, you know, there were all these stipulations, and like, you know, there's probably a lot of confusion and stuff. But at the end of the day, if y'all weren't racist, if y'all were not discriminating, the IRS wouldn't be like, yeah, you know, if this didn't happen, this wouldn't happen. So I really cannot, like, I swear if I hear one more person say, well, it wasn't really, yes, it was, because that was when they organized. They didn't organize. School prayer was not what pushed them. Sexual revolution did not push them. You know, even like they had complained about the curriculum. Basically, you know, there wasn't enough whitewash history, sex ed. They were mad about those things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even, and I'll find the quote. Actually, there's a book called God on Our Side, or On Their Side. It's like, yeah, that was it. Like, that was where they're like, you know, there's like that Twisted Sister song. We're not gonna take it.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Like, Paul is trying to get these people involved. They're like sending him the voicemail, not returning his phone calls. The IRS comes and says, boom, you keep being racist, then we're going to take your tax exempt. Yeah. They become outraged. They actually pick up the phone when Paul calls. He gets them all together and they start organizing around government intrusion, which the government was intruding by telling them not to be racist. What's interesting to me about government intrusion is that it's a talking point that we still see today when we hear, like, even with the U.S. Post Service, like, the privatization of all of our public service is...
While you're talking, I'm going to turn the AC up, so keep talking.
Okay. So, like, the privatization of our public service is about government intrusion.
Right.
You can get better services from a private institution where we can make money than you can the public. From security to the post office to the pushback for, like, Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and
go ahead.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and I think it's more like, again, like, remember, and the other thing that sparked my interest was there was a documentary that Samantha Bee had done that also targets, like, the real origins of the pro-life movement. And it seemed like on this side there were all the strategists, and on this side there's this growing sort of anger. And I think the way I say it is he saw, like, and like, you know, like the Birdman hand rub. That's kind of how, like, from the accounts that I read, it was more like he was standing, like, literally, like, the gift was Birdman hand rub. Like, he saw, he's like, oh, okay, these folks are mad. And so, yeah, and like, so basically all these people were up in arms about all of this. He saw an opportunity. Like, these folks, I can organize these people and we can start to form the movement that I want to shape.
Yes. And from what I heard, it was like they were on a conference call and something, and somebody said, what's next? And, like, people threw out some ideas, and somebody said, well, what about abortion? And people were like, oh, I guess so. And that was the move. Another place that we're seeing government intrusion comes up is it's with our masks in COVID. Like, the real pushback is like, I guess another way that people talk about it is individual freedom. You can't make me wear a mask.
Right.
So what I have found to be like a common denominator when government intrusion comes up is like the public good. What is best for the public and society is always erased for what I want to do because I want to do it.
And we have Paul Weyrich to thank. I mean, I don't want to put all of this on him.
Uh-huh.
But did you? I want to say I think I may have said this to you before. Again, growing up, you know, a lot of these folks like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, the original and the sequel, Oral Roberts, Jimmy Swaggart, Billy Graham, you know, all these folks, what's his name? Tony Perkins, James Dobson. You know, these are all names, you know, I heard. Ralph Reed, the Christian Coalition. These are all names I heard. I never heard Paul Weyrich's name in my life until last year. That's why I'm like, oh, this dude was crafty. Like,
yes,
it's like there's like seriously, like even like there's more obscure, like Oral Roberts is not super well known, especially if you're under 50. But there's always, but like Paul Weyrich, I never heard his name. That's on purpose. I did know Jerry Falwell because he met him. He was one of the people instrumental in getting Jerry Falwell involved and helping him craft they came up with the name Moral Majority. Yeah, that was a conversation between them two. But like that's really the important part of all of this is this dude was behind the scenes pulling the strings, and he had like. And I mean, and he was the architect. There were a lot of other major players involved, but there's just not enough time for me to talk about their role. But the government intrusion thing, before the pandemic, I would make an occasional trip to the Library of Congress reading room, as one does. And
that's what all the cool kids do, right?
Listen, I was so excited when I got my new library card. Okay, yeah. So there's his papers. Are archived at the Library of Congress. So I started going through those, and yeah, I mean, he had his hand in everything. Like he founded the Heritage Foundation. He was part of founding ALEC. And for those of you who don't know ALEC, what do they stand for?
So I do not remember, but if you've seen 13, I
have not yet.
DuVernay documentary that was on Netflix. I'm sure it's still there. But they talk about ALEC, and it's like this group. It's like a
American Legislative Exchange Council. I just Googled it.
So whenever you see a lot of conservative states or states run by Republican who are starting to pass like these abortion bans or the stand your ground laws, and you see like state after state passing the same or similar laws, that has come from ALEC, which like writes these bills and leaves them blanks. They send them to GOP legislators who fill in the blank, and they are able to pass them in mass and really transform what the country looks like. And this is all like a bunch of white male conservatives sitting in one room and who have helped buy elections and place legislators in here. Yeah. They're writing legislation that changes the way they live, legislation that allowed Trayvon Martin's killers to get off, legislations that are preventing women from getting abortion care that is essential and necessary. So if you haven't, I would say for me, 13th was a good place for me to understand ALEC and just how many corporations are involved with that. Like people who we pay money to, like our cell phone bills and stuff, and how they're all connected to this. It's disconcerting to say the least.
It is. And now I really need to watch 13th. It's been on my list, but it's not like there's just so much. I'm like, man, I know it's really important to watch, but I'm like, I'm gonna be mad, and I just need to. But yes, and I learned about them So if you remember 10 years ago in Arizona, they dubbed it the Show Me Your Papers law.
Oh, yes.
Draconian immigration law, SB 1070. That's when I learned about ALEC, because they had their hands in that. And what I believe is like there's NPR, actually, I think it's NPR that did a whole story on them and how they were instrumental, like drafting that language. And also kind of like in cahoots with the private prisons, because the private prisons were about to make it rain over locking up Black and brown people. So yeah, but yes, Paul Weyrich. Those are the two major ones. There's a bunch of other conservative organizations he founded, but those are the two major ones. The two that like probably the most well known now. But if you like, when I was reading through just like his newsletters and then like meeting notes and writing to his people, writing to supporters and doing all their planning, they the legislation that they were influencing, or the like sort of the was it, God, what is it, legislative agenda. When they're going through a legislative agenda, I mean, it was they were working on opposing OSHA, because who needs that? Walk it off. You fall off your ladder, walk it off. OSHA. What was the Clean Air Act?
Oh yes,
Clean Air Act, and of course, public assistance, welfare, public transportation, to a certain extent, and like it's just like that was their hand. Like they would push through like these are the things we need to oppose. These are the talking points, and we're reaping the results of that work. And then the churches, like the religious leaders, they took that and ran with it. So we had direct mail where they would send out, when they were pushing for like getting involved in local elections, they would push for certain candidates, and like they would push through this rhetoric. The TV evangelists played a huge part, because the TV evangelism was kind of starting to be, it's like, I think it's like how we saw social media in 2007. I feel like the way they talk about in the late 70s is kind of how we talked about social media. It seems like, but it was like this new thing and everyone was in it. But yeah, like, so Pat Robertson with his show, Jerry Falwell had Old Fashioned Jesus Hour. What was it? Old Fashioned Gospel Hour or something like that. And then we had James Dobson, who came along later with a kinder, gentler authoritarian in Christianity, because he was a child psychiatrist. Oh, by the way, I'm hesitant to say that because I need to find the receipts. I do remember reading this as a kid, because I grew up listening to Focus on the Family. My mom used to listen to it. There was a point where James Dobson, he was opposed to abortion only in the cases of assault or incest, or I think if the mother's life is in danger. I will find those receipts, but there was a point, but
So you've said something that I hear a lot in the Black community in general, that it seems like we have kind of picked up and adopted, or like learned from these evangelical Christians who we've already determined really don't love being in the same space with Black folks.
Right.
But you talked about family values and Jerry Falwell and James Dobson and focus on the family. So when you hear family values and you hear focus on the family, you think they're talking about all families, and you see a lot of Black people pick up this language to condemn LGBTQ people and to condemn behavior that is too risque, too sexual. How did this language come to be attached to, like, why do evangelical Christians use this type of language, and what do they mean when they talk about focus on the family and family values?
So the rhetoric of family values, with that, like I have yet to pinpoint sort of whose specifically whose strategy that was, but yeah, the rhetoric of family, and honestly, like you could really trace that back to the 50s with Eisenhower. Right around the time we had the pledge, like God in the pledge, because Eisenhower was really concerned about foreigners, communism, socialism, whatever, and like us not being American enough. There's one of the books I read, the Evangelicals. I'll put a link in it. That actually talks a lot about Eisenhower, and like I feel like some of the stuff it was like what he believed was like a precursor. But so like the whole concept of the nuclear family, which is honestly kind of relatively new, but I feel like that kind of took shape in the 50s, like post World War II, and then in the 70s, and again, that's where these TV preachers kind of came into play. Like they took this rhetoric and ran with it. But that one, and that one, I'm not sure if that was kind of, it became this organic thing or if it was a strategy. Given what I've seen about these other things, I'm sure it was a strategy. But family, from what I understood, family was about excluding. Just like the concept of being white, it was about excluding people. That's it. Family is about excluding people, because family meant mom, dad, 2.5 kids, a house with a white picket fence, and a dog named Spot. That was family. And the fear mongering that kind of took place, in James Dobson, he really played a role in this. There are outside forces that are coming for your family. They're coming to get you. And they want to, corrupt your children. And I mean, and of course that rhetoric wasn't new. They said that about rock music, when they called it race music, and they passed out flyers in the 40s and 50s. So that's nothing new. But yeah, like there's outside forces. Secularism is a big one.
Yes.
Like immorality, LGBTQ people, although, and that was the thing, like I feel like that's more like probably historic memory, because like growing up, if I were to compare what I heard then to what I heard about conservatives now, it's definitely hearing much more now. But I think it's because they're forced to. I think if they, like, from what I saw, like they were wildly homophobic, but it seemed like a lot of them really just wanted to pretend it wasn't there.
Yes.
Yeah. So I didn't see rhetoric. It was kind of like, oh, all these things and these people too, and we don't like them either. And I don't want to diminish like the harmful and violent theology that was directed towards LGBTQ people, but I do see a difference from the rhetoric I saw then to now.
And here's what I think that is, because it seems like as long, the more visible LGBTQ people became in culture and society, the stronger those attacks got. So like when society is like participating in the marginalization of this group of people, I don't have to attack them. And I feel like it was similar with the race and Bob Jones. Like as long as society was okay with desegregation, I don't have to say anything. But once things interrupt my normal, then I have to attack more, and that's when the language becomes more prevalent.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Representation.
Yes.
And like, just side note, I lived in Louisville, Kentucky for a total accumulation of 4 years. Louisville is where the flagship Southern Baptist Seminary is located. Al Mohler is the president. Side note, I learned that the Southern Baptists used to be more progressive, and then there was a takeover in the late 70s. Learned that when I was in Kentucky.
What's interesting?
That's an entire. I feel like that's an entire semester.
But what's interesting is all of this is very recent. And
Mhm.
it's all in line with Black civil rights movement. Like,
Right.
again, the more rights that people get, the more acceptable their existence become, the
Yeah.
more I have to fire up this rhetoric and my
Right.
pushback and takedown of them. So that's very interesting. I mean, and it's the similar thing that we saw with the Confederate monuments. All these monuments were going up around
Mhm.
the same time. So
Years after the Civil War, like in Montana. Did Montana exist?
but that
That's
allows
what I
us
got.
to see the connection of what's going on now too.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden now, all of these things that emerged in the 60s are popping back up as we start expanding rights for other groups and pushing against their family norm, their family values.
Yeah, it's a matter of when you can't ignore it. Because like when I was thinking of the Southern Baptist Seminary, and I'm not saying this as a good thing because it was, because given who was giving the conference, but I remember one summer, it was what's the Ethics and Liberty whatever commission. Like I'll have to look. I don't remember what exactly it's called, but they had like an annual conference, and the theme for one, it was like 2015 or 2016. Their words were transgenderism. They but I was like, oh damn, they're saying the word, and it, like when I tell you, I did not hear that word in a sermon, and like, I mean, I think the first time I saw or heard mentioned general was in the Risky Business in the movie, like in general as like in public as a kid, but yeah, and always like as a punchline. And I know there's a really good documentary on Netflix that talks about that. But yeah, like I remember seeing that. I was like, oh, they're doing a conference. And again, I'm sure the conference was trash, but it was interesting. Like they can't ignore this anymore. And like folks, for me, like I'm not an optimist. And I also, it's easy for me to say this as a cisgender woman who my life is not in danger the way transgender women are, especially women of color, especially Black women. But I saw that like they're backed in a corner. They can't ignore it, and that means the work that folks are doing, they're working.
It's
like,
working.
Yeah.
It's working. Oh, that's interesting because I was in a conference earlier today, Netroots actually. Yeah, I was in Netroots conference earlier today, and they were like, Donald Trump's attacks on voting rights in the United States Postal Service and everything, it shows that we're winning. We are making progress on this issue, and he is trying to stop us. So,
yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I know, and they even said this in the conference, like it is discouraging right now, but you have to realize like these attacks mean that we have some power and some momentum on our side. And I think it's just in those moments, not to get discouraged by that and to keep pushing. And I know it's hard right now when we're all just exhausted.
And that's why, because like everything is terrible. Here in Richmond, Virginia, we got the monuments that are coming down, and that's been it. And you can see photos on my Twitter feed or on IG, and it's been glorious. I was present when one of them was carted away. People cheered. It was great. People were hugging. Yeah. Anyway, so like, and at the same time, there's been protests almost every day. The police have been like tear gas happy, like no one's business. We've gone through 2 police chiefs.
Wow.
We had one, and then he left, and then we had an interim, and like 5 minutes later, he's like,
yeah.
So, sorry, I'm like, I lost my train of thought when I was going with this. Oh, so for me, and I've been involved with these things before. As far as my mental health, I've not been going to the protests as much because I don't have the energy for that. But like for me, like I'm looking at my contribution and this knowledge that I have, which is basically it's an insider's knowledge. And I've talked to, the great thing about Twitter is I found other people like me, other folks who grew up around white evangelicals, or kind of had their foot in different worlds, like the Black church and the white evangelical church. And, there's fews out there. And it's really important for me to insert my voice in the conversation. There is some good reporting, some good reporting on evangelicals. But for every good report, there's 10 op-eds like, what are they doing? Why do they like this guy? Let's talk to Jim Bob in Bigottsville, Alabama, and his wife, Martha. I swear to God, I feel like 2018, 2019, was nothing but these, they went to, bumfuck Indiana, to talk to this couple from the first bigot Methodist church. Well, I think we should all send them back.
Yeah.
So it's like, why y'all don't have to keep writing the same thing. But I think it's important because I do have a perspective that, I have a unique perspective, as a Black person that grew up around them. And I think as an ex-evangelical, if you've heard that term, it's it's a hashtag, and it talks about folks like me who grew up around that and kind of left that behind. The folks that are in that space, it's overwhelmingly white. Having said that, there are some really good takes, I think, within that group. There's folks that kind of have some work to do, but there are folks that have really good takes where they're like, listen, we grew up around these people. We know how they think. When what's his face, the one that couldn't go to malls because he kept rolling up on little girls, Roy Moore.
Fun fact.
Roy Moore.
Roy Moore was my local judge growing up. We never had this discussion. Roy Moore.
Were you around when he's on the 10 Commandment shit?
The high school that they were talking about him rolling up was the high school I went to and graduated from. Like the Gadsden Mall, walked that mall every Saturday night from 7th grade to senior year. Yeah, very familiar with Judge Roy Moore. And even when all of this was hitting the news when he was running for Senate, I guess it was 2 years ago now.
It feels like it was 15, but yeah.
It really does. But I was talking to one of my friends who I've known since elementary school, and she was like, yeah, I was in the doctor's office with my auntie, and he came in, and he just kept staring at my boobs. So, what is crazy and gross about it all is it wasn't really a secret.
That was the thing. And I'm going to post a link to, there's a person who, I'm blanking on everyone's name, but I'll post the link with all the others. There's a really good article in the LA Times from someone who grew up specifically, I think, in the homeschooler, the homeschooler movement, a particular conservative Christian strain or whatever that he was a part of, and talked about courtship. Because there was, because at some point, and even when he was defending, he was, I guess when he was 30, he was courting some teenager and he had the parents' permission. I remember reading that and being like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. And then I was like, oh, that's messed up. Because I wasn't in that world, but I've seen it before. I did see it in the missionary world. I remember particular an affiliated missionary organization is what I remember. There was a similar situation, but I was familiar. And I was like, oh yeah, I know the setup he's talking about. But yeah, but that's the thing. And she wrote about the details. This is the frame. This is how they think, or just within this group. And I think it's really important to hear from people who were in the midst of it. Because
you talk a lot about your personal experience, growing up in this, but I also want to make sure that people understand that your research is also informed not just by documentaries, but first or primary source research. Like when you're going to the libraries, you're really looking at the people who were writing about these issues at this time. And really explore, like taking, like it feels to me like a time machine, like you're going back to experience it as it was happening. Mm-hmm. How has that been for you? Like how would you describe that experience?
Listen, I nerded out so much when Mrs. America came out. Quick note, Mrs. America is about Phyllis Schlafly and the ERA.
And I was really shocked by that because I thought Mrs. America was going to be Black woman president.
Girl.
Yes. What is her name? Shirley Chisholm. I'm sorry, I completely blanked. And I can't even blame it on wine today because I'm drinking water. But I thought Mrs. America was going to be about Shirley Chisholm. So I'm like excited to watch, and by the second episode, I'm like, okay, but where's Shirley? With that said, I did enjoy the story, and it was very enlightening to me.
Listen, first of all, Cate Blanchett can do anything. I'm going to get sidetracked and say Cate Blanchett can do anything. She can play anyone ever. She can play anyone. She nailed, like, Katharine Hepburn, who's one of my favorite actresses and as a kid. And Phyllis Schlafly, like the range on that woman, like I will riot if she doesn't get all the Emmys. Like I'm really excited about the Black. Like I hope they bestow all the Emmys on Black folks. But if Cate Blanchett, like she was amazing. Watch her playing Phyllis Schlafly. Watch a video. She disappears into that role. A way I haven't seen since I watched Denzel Washington play Malcolm X when he disappeared into that role. But so Mrs. America, and like if you're looking for something, Mrs. America, I feel like takes this approach that I imagine feminism probably looked like in the 70s, which is like predominantly white women. And I don't know if that was intentional, but once I went in with that mentality, I wasn't terribly disappointed. So if you expect them to give equal weight to other stories, you will be disappointed. You will be upset. You might throw things at your TV.
And you know what? I appreciate it because they were active in showing how, like, they weren't always purposeful in erasing Black folks, but how it just happened it happened and they were completely oblivious to the fact that like they were just so caught up in their worldview and thought that they were being inclusive because I have brought this Black person on staff. And I know I have talked about this with my Black friends in nonprofit world and corporate world. Like they're so, and they call it like, what do they call it? It's some kind of circle. Like they bring you in. They're so excited to have you there. They ignore everything you say until you're discontent and you leave. And the circle starts all over again. So it's like we saw that happening in real time and how they were completely oblivious to the fact that they were doing it.
And it's amazing. And I feel like the people in the calls, and I think the people behind the series to a certain extent. But I mean, but I looked at it as like it was. I mean, Phyllis Schlafly, Cate Blanchett was front and center in the promo materials. So, like, I really did think. I honestly thought it was really about her. And she was in every episode. Like they gave an episode to each activist. Like so, they gave like one to Gloria Steinem and one to Shirley Chisholm, one to Betty Friedan. I always say her name wrong. But
is it Flo Kennedy?
Flo Kennedy.
She's my new favorite person who I have to dig into. I loved who I saw her in Mrs. America, and it made me want to read what she had written, like read her books and really learn about her and her perspective.
And they didn't give her enough.
They did not.
They really didn't. More. But like when I was watching it, you want to talk about nerding out, because then, you know, like I watched it for what it was. I was like, I'm focused on the Stop ERA folks, because that was really the compelling story. Yes. I already know how the feminist. My mom was in her 20s, married, raising small kids in the 70s. My mom has never. She's always been. They've never been about. They've never been about us. Like, and my mom's conservative. That's one of them. But I mean, the older I get, like, I thought it was just because she was conservative, but now I was like, oh no, they weren't about people like her, because like they're like, oh, we don't want to stay at home. Well, my mom was working outside the home, her and my dad both, because they had 2 small children, and they didn't have family to fall back on. They didn't have a choice.
Yeah,
so nobody was checking for them. My mom didn't stay home until I was born, in '78, like a little bit after that. But like they weren't, like they weren't marching for people like her. And I think I kind of understood as I got older, like, oh yeah, they really weren't. They really were erasing people like her. But in the show, I mean, there's like names that came up, like Phil Crane, who was a congressman who was involved with Paul Warwick and his bunch. They got James Marsden's fine ass to play him. I don't know why. He's really that good looking, but I like looking at James Marsden. They had, oh gosh, who was the other big? I can't remember. There's another like major player, but I was watching these things and I was saying like, oh yeah, I read about that. I read about that. And it's like you see it, kind of like I'm like, oh, so excited. Like you seriously want to see someone nerd out. Like watching that was really fascinating, and particularly, I know there was a lot of back and forth about how they portrayed Phyllis Schlafly. I know her people, like her children and her like Eagle Forum, the organization she started, they're like they hated, they were mad. They mad the whole they didn't like how they portrayed her. But I also read a couple of think pieces where it seemed they were implying that they were a little bit too sympathetic. And that's the thing. And I don't know, like I don't want to read too much into it, but like it brings me back to, when we talk about the benevolent racists or benevolent sexists, like, and it's like they did portray her as a complex person.
Yes.
But that's the thing. It's like, but I was like, were you expecting her to be mean? Because I'm sure she wasn't to her family and friends, and maybe even to servers and like kids on the street. Because I grew up around women who thought like her, and they were nice. They were nice women. They were nice to me. I played with their kids. And that's the thing to understand is I think people want to, I think it's not a lot of folks, but I think there's a lot of folks that paint this picture of evangelicals being like, they use hate. And it is, but that's not going to get them anywhere, because even if the evangelicals believe they're acting out of principle and out of love, but they also, these kind of people, like they were friends with my family. Again, I played with their kids. I went to their house for dinner. Like these were people individually were very welcoming. Now they would turn around, would not hesitate to vote against my interests, would not hesitate. They would be the first to call, Black Lives Matter, a bunch of thugs and rioters, and even the ones who aren't MAGA people, like it's complex. And I think, when I remember when I was trying to sit down and write about being Black growing up there, and I was like, dealing with racism. And then I thought about it, and I was like, did I deal with racism? I mean, it was there, but then that's when it came to me as like, it was erased. And that was by design. And then that kind of brings us back to the school thing. They took race out of it with the segregation academies.
Yes.
They took race out of it because they knew by the 70s, you couldn't say that. People stopped saying the quiet part out loud, or like less so than they did probably in the 60s and the 50s before that. Jim Crow was gone in the by the 70s. So they, that's why government, it's government intrusion. The IRS is giving us all these rules, and they're interfering with how we want to run our school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, I mean, Christianity Today stood up for them. And I have those receipts if anyone wants to see them. Christianity Today stood up for Bob Jones. Same stuff. Oh, it's, sure, people shouldn't discriminate, but the government shouldn't tell them what to do. What's the government tell them to do?
Yes. And I mean, again, this is what we see with the COVID and the masks. This is what we see with guns. They're coming to take away our guns. This is what we see with what else? I was gonna say something else, but it's a repeating theme about government intrusion and their right to discriminate without interference is what it boils down to. So we define what we have learned today. We have learned that evangelicals are Bible believing, salvation Christian folks who originally didn't care much about political involvement, but then the government came and said, you can't do this, and they all gathered together. People like to call it government intrusion, but we see the racial undertones. They came up with this very popular phrase and talking point around family values that us Black folks like to use, but in reality, that was about excluding us as well. Because our families didn't look like their families.
It was like heterosexual families, like single parents were not included in this. LGBTQ parents were not included in this. It was about an ideal and a certain class too, and it was about keeping other folks out. And there was I think I may have mentioned this. Did I talk about the White House Conference on Families?
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's also a whole interview. But the White House Conference on Families, Jimmy Carter held. I want to try. Actually, I do want to write something a little bit more because that was really fascinating, and the conservative Christian, especially women, really just went and flipped all the tables. We're like, with the way things were going, starting with the name. There was, because I guess like the Conference on Families, there were regional conferences in major cities, and there were delegates, and there's all these politics around sending delegates to them, and that was very complex. But there were folks that objected to families, plural, because they're like, well, what families? Because that sounds like they're trying to include them other folks that, those other folks that are sinful. Like they honestly rejected to objected to like families plural, and so that was the whole thing. But during the Conference of Families, that's where they really showed out. They staged walkouts when there was voting about issues that they didn't agree with. They were basically like 3-track mind, like abortion. Yeah, abortion was the biggest one. And all the other talking points were like, these resolutions, these are the ones we care about. And we don't really care about these other things. And they staged, it was a 2-day conference, and they staged a walkout for at least one of them. And then they had their own rally, pro-family rally, an alternative rally outside. And it was just a lot of the epitome of doing the most. But that was really where it showed out, where it's like, y'all, it was really about, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's interesting because, there were women kind of in the middle that, because the conference also talked about issues with daycare and like possibly federally funded daycare and programs for, like housing and like employment programs and like all these other like practical things. And the Christian right, like their delegation, like, nah, you keep it. But like, that was the thing that got me. And like, that's the thing, I keep going back to that whenever I see people, and admittedly so, I've probably even done it too. They get on and they say, well, I don't understand. They say they're pro-life, but they're okay with police brutality. It's like, y'all need to understand what life they're for. It's not ours.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not ours. And even with the pro-life, with abortions, I mean, I think it's a matter of like, they see like the babies as an innocent, but once they get out the womb, good luck.
It's right. You know what? I've been writing a lot about that, but what's so interesting to me about pro-life, so to get theological on y'all, I think when God is for life with dignity. So God wants to make sure that you are able to live a full, happy, and whole life, and you can do so with dignity and respect. Right. And when people say they're pro-life, they never attach dignity to people's ability to live life. You just want a bunch of babies out here, and you don't care about the quality of the life once they're here. And to me, that is the antithesis of being pro-life. Because if you're going to be pro-life truly, you have to care about dignity and the well-being of someone once they're like actually born and living. And you can't do that when you're sending kids to school in the middle of a global pandemic.
And that's the thing, and that's where it's really about. That's really when they show themselves. And like, there's 1,000 thoughts that descended me on once.
I know.
AD likes to do.
Okay, we have 7 more minutes. So.
But like, I'll give a good example. Ronald Reagan.
Uh-huh.
I'll try not to go too much down that rabbit hole. Hopefully folks can follow, because I know we're like, squirrel. But no, this is good, because like, and it's good to talk about this with someone like you like that has a framework, understanding, and stuff. So like, it's very exciting for me, because I've been reading about this stuff, and I'm like, I've said to friends, like, no one cares about this as much as I do. Nobody is as excited to read the committee report from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare from 1974 as much as I am. Nobody.
That's hilarious.
No one is as interested in reading Bob Jones versus the IRS court case than I am.
So what we are going to do is we're going to give you guys some resources. They won't be primary sources, as intriguing as those are, but we're going to give you some documentaries and things where you can go to get fuller context of what we've been talking about today.
Can I make a note about Ronald Reagan?
Yes.
Yeah. So very important. Ronald Reagan. I barely remember. I was born in 1978, so like when he was elected, I was, working on motor skills.
Yes.
Eating solid food. So the rhetoric that we hear around the occupant of the White House, which is what I like to call him, that was the other thing that got me when I first started. Not just him, but him and Carter. So Jimmy Carter, because he was Baptist, he was a Sunday school teacher. He actually was the one, he talked about being born again. Yeah. And the media had never heard that term. And he talked about his faith all the time. Sound like anyone we knew that went before 45? Someone else that talked about his faith all the time, went to church, blah, blah, blah.
There's also, I'm going to find the documentary and drop it in the show notes, because there's a really interesting documentary that talks about George Bush. It talks about Junior, but it also talks about how Daddy Bush he wasn't religious enough for the conservatives.
Oh, they did. They were mad. They didn't think he was conservative enough when chose him. They were mad.
So it's really interesting to see how much changed from when Daddy Bush was vice president to when Junior became president, and like the how their religious identity grew.
Reagan, because Reagan, he wasn't necessarily because there's some that try to paint him as a conservative, but I've been listening to his podcast, which I'll also drop. He was when he was an actor, he was part of the Screen Actors Guild Award. He was somewhat involved in the House Un-American Activities Committee during McCarthyism. He was the FBI snitch. And then he ran for governor. And then later for president.
Snitch. Oh my gosh. I know exactly what you're talking about, but I've never heard it said like that. And
I like saying Ronald Reagan was an FBI snitch.
That's good.
But he was more progressive. Like he, as governor of California, his record was like, I believe when they were before Roe v. Wade, like there were states that were passing laws, and he did sign into law legalizing abortion in California, I believe. However, when you talk about the federal intrusion and stuff, because I feel like at first I painted this picture like, oh, he was kind of this sort of moderate dude, and then the Christian evangelicals came along, and he's like, hey, I like the Bible. And that is kind of how it went, but he really, even before then, like I was reading his comments, he was on that stuff about federal programs or government intrusion even before, like when he was running for governor and he would be asked about like fair housing ordinances. He pulled that same stuff. Oh, well, the government shouldn't tell property managers how to run their business. But again, race is out of it. That's really important. He didn't mention race. And at one point, I think he even said, well, it's not about race. The government shouldn't tell property or property managers what to do. When he was elected governor, there were a lot of the activism was going on in Berkeley. He told jokes about violence against them. Like, was it taking a strap to him?
Yes.
Taking out and he made comments like that. And when he ran for president, that was when it really because the evangelicals were mad at Carter because they're kind of Christian. He liked black and brown books a little too much. They were mad at him about the IRS thing, which kind of came to a head in like 76 or 78. And they kind of put him together with that. But it came down to nah, he's not our kind of Christian. We don't want this dude. And they put their support behind Ronald Reagan, and they said the same stuff we heard, like, oh, finally we have someone who like reflects our values. Like all the stuff we hear now, they said the same thing. And this is, and again, this is stuff I'm reading. This is where I do know like historic memory is important. And again, but I was two when all that happened, so I don't have that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were like, this is our guy. And there's a very famous moment where he said he was addressing the National Affairs briefing. That's also another interview, which is basically a gathering of a bunch of church leaders and like political strategists in DC, and it's basically getting church leaders trained and getting them like equipped to go and like do voter registration drives and all this kind of stuff. And I feel like it seemed like very similar to the what's the Value Summit or the Faith and Freedom, like that, like the stuff that happens now. But he addressed them and he said, like, I know you can't endorse me, but I endorse you. That apparently that line was fed to him.
Of course.
One of the strategists that work with White Rick. But that's, it's a famous quote, like, you can't endorse me, but I endorse you. And he would start quoting from the Bible and, blah, 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 blah. Now, once he got into office, he pissed them off, nominating Sandra Day O'Connor because she was pro-choice. And, in general, not completely being complete trash to marginalized people, like that absolutely, and moving a little bit to the center on abortion. But yeah, like he was treated like the similarities were, it was almost eerie. Like I was like, I feel like I can't believe I'm watching this. I can't believe like, so we went through this before. And I mean, we survived. Well, not all of us did. I shouldn't say that. A lot of people didn't survive Reagan.
Yeah.
But it put it in perspective, and for me, it was cathartic to read all of this. And I know I haven't even touched the surface with all of this, but I hope folks got a sense of, kind of how this movement came together. Like, there's so many other intricate parts of it, but
you know what? We're not here to teach the whole class. We are here to teach them enough to think about, recognize when they see it happening today, and to dig deeper in these sources that we're going to share.
And just understand, like, I think, and that's why, like, I try to keep speaking up and signal boost other folks that speak up, and just understanding where stuff is coming from. Like, with the mask, like, when they said, oh, the government can't tell me, it's like, oh yeah, like, then it harkened back to the segregation academies. It harkened back to when we try to get federally funded daycare. Why we tried to do that, 71 and 74, 75. And both times they passed around these scare tactics. Oh, the government wants to take your children and raise them.
So, and here's the thing. Imagine if we had federally funded daycare right now, we would not have this childcare crisis that we have. And a lot of the daycare centers who are being forced to close down because they don't have income coming in right now because of the pandemic would have support, so that once we do go back to work, people would have somewhere to put their kids. But that's all of the reason I really wanted to have this conversation with Laura, is so that we could see how much of this had been in the work for so long, how it has repeated itself, and so that we can also, as people who are doing the work to be free, so that we can understand the level of commitment that we have to have and meet to push back against the policies and the beliefs and the talking points, some that we have internalized, so that we can unlearn and to recognize and to do the work to fix this. And I'm so happy you joined me for this conversation.
I am too. This was really fun. It's very exciting. I mean, really, I go on. I thought about bringing the brochure about the truth about the NAACP. But I haven't read it fully yet. Like, listen. I mean, I like some of the stuff I look at. I'm like, really? Like, they really like? Yeah, but it's mind blowing. But I think also just not underestimating, and I think a lot of folks don't. And I think especially like the younger, I think millennials and Gen Z, I think the younger generation, I think, are much more astute, like about a lot of these things, particularly like as far as access to information. But I think it's really important to not underestimate, because I think they'll look at, the anti-mask people, they're a bunch of backwards, like they don't, and there's ignorance there. But pay attention to the people who are feeding them that. Pay attention to those people.
I was going to say, even if they're backwards and don't know, this has been ingrained. They have learned this through propaganda. Like, it was brochures then, it's Fox News today. Like, they are getting these ideas from somewhere, and those are like the monsters behind the message.
Yes.
Where can
they are organized? Listen, Stop ERA. I'd say out of all the movements, those women were, I mean, I don't want to say information because I don't think they deserve that title, but like, those women were on message. They had media training. They were bringing baked bread, because Phyllis Schlafly was petty. The Stop ERA women were bringing homemade bread to legislators that were considering ratifying it, the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, in the 70s. And like, they would bring bread saying, from the bread makers to the breadwinners. Listen, and I mean, a lot of people, and in the series, they talk about how they talk with Phyllis Schlafly, like, hey, you're kind of she's doing feminist shit while opposing the feminists. And
No,
I
and
never always not understanding that, but especially then it's like these women, they're out of the home, like they're learning they're learning a skewed version of politics, but media training, they're speaking to legislators on, like, they're testifying, like writing letters, like they're getting involved, like they're doing activism and they're getting trained for it, and all to stick to the feminists.
yes, yeah. They were working.
Ooh, they were, oh my gosh.
So if you have not already, make sure you check out Mrs. America. It's on FX docu series. It wasn't a documentary. It was a series. Series. So yeah, FX. I think you can find it. I watched it on Hulu. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on Hulu.
Yes. So check that out. Laura, where can the people find you?
The people can find me on Twitter. Is where I'm at a lot, at CLolaGo. I'm on Instagram too. Same hashtag. God, I'm so old. Not hashtag. Was it you children call it? Handle. Thank you. on the face freeze, you know. On the Facegram. And I also, I said before, I am underemployed, and I have a Patreon where I try to give updates on the research that I've been doing. Still working on what I want to turn this into, because it really kind of turned into a monster. And like,
you dig so much it gets too big to do.
Oh my God, so much. And so working on kind of honing that stuff in. But if you want to subscribe to my Patreon, I'll put a link there. If you would like to help me keep me fed with the cheapest nice coffee I can get, and groceries and things like that. Like I said, I'm underemployed. I'll put my Cash App and PayPal up.
Yeah.
And just anytime you want to learn more about this, I have been doing threads every now and then. And the approach I'm taking, like Kia said, I'm taking splices, because like there's already a bunch of historic accounts, and I'll post those. You can already read all that stuff. What I'm focusing on is like incidences, and like flyers, events, campaigns, like the bread thing with SAPIRA, and talking about what happened around them. So I haven't come up with a hashtag for it, but if you want to learn about individual things, you can go to my Twitter page, and I'll have threads. I'm trying to do ones per. Oh, hey, there's just. I'm waving at the comment like they can see me.
Hey, Michael.
Like my mom.
No,
but if you want to learn more, like I try to delve in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I looked down at my phone earlier and I saw Michael Jackson has subscribed to your channel, and I was like, Michael Jackson. Hey, right
back. But yeah, if you like, I try to delve into small things and talk about like how they relate to the bigger picture. So and if you have questions, or if there's certain aspects you want to learn more about, I probably have an article or a book or something that I can recommend to you. So
awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Laura. And
thanks for having me. I am out of Moscato.
Yes. Finish the bottle. That's how you know we are the Real Drunk Show. Thank you all for joining us. You can find me on all social media at Kia Speaks. You can find The Real Drunk Show at realdrunkshow.com. Go there and you can find all the places you can listen to the podcast and follow us on social media. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Next time we come back, we're going to have teachers on here so that they can help our parents navigate COVID. And
pay teachers $1 million.
Say that again, Laura.
Pay teachers $1 million. Oh my God.
Yes.
Teachers. I'm an instructor. Like, I'm not K through 12. I'm an adjunct. But listen, pay teachers $1 million.
And that is the final word. Pay teachers $1 million. Have
They're
a great
amazing.
day, y'all. Bye.
Bye.